Now I would like to invite the coming panel, which is on global partnerships, South-South relations for the green economy. And I would like to invite to come up to the stage Edem Bakshish, Regional Chief, UN Office for South-South Cooperation, Amali Amin, Associate Director, Third Generation Environmentalism, E3G, Lars Josephson, Chairman, Global Agenda Council on the Decarbonization of Energy from the World Economic Forum, and Martin Hiller, Director of the REAP, Renewable Energies and Energy Efficiency Project, and finally, Dr. Biranki Narayan Satpathy, Senior Advisor, National Institute for Transforming India, Government of India. Can I also invite you to turn around the name tags? Oh, you know, one of my experiences, and I shouldn't be saying that, when I had the chance to work with the World Economic Forum, was that I was also like the Chief Hospitality Officer. And I must say it's very good because at the end it's about human beings, and looking after them is almost as important than actually decarbonizing energy. So, sorry, I couldn't resist. Okay, so here we want to discuss about the role of South-South relations, but I also want to, in the context of green economy, but I also want to raise a little bit the question of what green economy can bring to developing economies. Because I think one of the big challenges which we do have, especially when we saw the latest COP negotiations, is this kind of almost divide in the world of the developed economies versus the developing economies, where there's a little bit of ping pong going on, who should do what and not. And I think green economy is a little bit more the demand-driven side of dealing with climate change, which I think is very important and is also helping through the demand side of it to change behaviors. But I think it's a question also to be asked in the developing countries or southern hemisphere environment, what will work, what cannot work. But before going into more specific questions, I would actually like to invite each of you to share your initial thoughts about this topic with us. And I will actually start at the very left-hand side of my seat with Dr. Satpathy. And if you could just share in 3 minutes quickly a little bit how you would phrase this question and what you would put forward.
Thank you. Since I belong to the government, I will share the government perspective. Now, the green economy to the government means low carbon economy. We are looking at the world today in a different context as we used to look earlier, with per capita income of different countries ranked according to their per capita income. Today we are comparing the per capita income in the world with the per capita emissions. So the green economy in India would mean a low carbon economy. After 55 years of planning, we have now in the 12th five-year plan, which is currently underway, we are looking at what's the way that the government can promote low carbon economy in a country like India, which size is the third largest as far as PPP is concerned. And in that context, in the 12th five-year plan, we have a chapter on sustainable development. And that gives us the entire strategy on how the government can promote low carbon economy across 35 states and union territories. Each state will prepare a green growth plan which will have a particular target in different sectors of the economy, whether it is energy, whether it is transport, all sectors will be covered in that. And the Green Growth Institute is one of the knowledge partners in many of the states of the union. I think this is briefly what we are doing today in the government to promote the green economy in India.
Okay, I think later I will get back, so I let you prepare already on this question. What of specific directions you choose, or where you see really the big sweet spots for this development in India? But we'll get back to that later.
Okay.
Edem, Thank you for being with us. So what, from your side, being in the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, what will in the South-South Cooperation green economy play as a role?
Sure, thank you. First, thank you very much for the great event, both to the hosts and to the organizers. I think it's a very important opportunity for us to exchange views. Let me share very briefly what our office is doing so that, you know, because I was asked by a few colleagues. So we have we're a tiny office within the UN, and we have three pieces of our mandate. One is to support, we're the cross-UN system coordinator on South-South cooperation, so we assist other sectoral UN agencies, funds and programs in advancing South-South cooperation agenda. We are also to assist the government focal points on South-South cooperation where they're existent, on advancing their national agendas on South-South or East-East cooperation as it's referred to in some of the regions. And the third, I think, important element that is relevant to what we're discussing today is we're a substantive secretariat for the General Assembly High-Level Committee on South-South Cooperation. And in this capacity, we contribute to the biennial report of the Secretary General of the United Nations on the state of South-South cooperation. I was also asked by the colleagues today and yesterday to bring in the definition of South-South cooperation. Because when I was discussing yesterday with one of the colleagues, we went through a good deal of our discussion, and then I said, China, for example, is an active player in South-South cooperation. He said, wait, you're mentioning China, but some of these countries are above the Southern Hemisphere. So it's really not about geography. When we refer to South-South cooperation, we speak about, and that's how it's defined in the UN operational guidelines on South-South cooperation. South-South cooperation is a process whereby two or more developing countries pursue their individual or shared objectives through exchange in capacity, knowledge, expertise, and know-how, and resources, of course. And they do it through a collective action at the level of civil societies, governments, private sector, and academia. So one point of course we can discuss the details on practical contributions from the UN and the role of the UN in this process, especially with reference to green economy. But one important thing for us, I think, to keep in mind is that even if we, as multilaterals or as UN, don't support South-South cooperation, it is there. It exists, it did exist before. Maybe we didn't call it South-South cooperation, but it is out there, and we witness the growing volumes in South-South trade, in South-South development cooperation, etc. One important thought is South-South cooperation is not to replace, but rather to complement. We always say South-South cooperation is a complement to traditional forms of cooperation. And a second thought I want, actually it's in support of what you said. I think I've heard you saying that behavior is very important when we speak about South-South, about green economies. So for me, green economy and green society are the two things that come together. Mm-hmm. So it's very important, and South-South cooperation can contribute to this, that we have this mentality shift, not only at the level of decision makers, but all of us in our everyday lives.
Thank you very much. A very good point to stress the importance of the people and their way to rethink what they do. Now I'm very pleased to have with us Amali Amin from the third generation environmentalism. Sorry, this is a tongue breaker for me. Anyhow, so I'm looking forward to you, given that you also represent an organization who wants to really look in a new way at all those questions. How do you see the relationship between green economy and really those South-South relations, as we heard defined, which I must say sometimes I replace it by developing countries. So actually I'm happy to hear that I'm more or less in the lines. Please.
Thank you. So we at E3G, we work in several contexts, but in particular in country, working with many governments. I work very closely with several developing country governments who are all trying to embark on a green economy. And I think what is particularly interesting and why South-South cooperation is particularly welcome is that there's a clear recognition that it's not easy to move to a green economy. It's not just about new technology. It's about reforming, transforming economies, bringing new economic incentives, new business models, new ways of financing. And the way my particular area of work and focus is on climate finance and public policy, how they can best mobilize the private sector. And I think yesterday in one of the sessions, I think Sean Kidney, who I meet in many, many contexts in different parts of the world talking about these issues, he said that it's really about, the risk management, managing the risk transition. We don't necessarily need new instruments, but we need to use instruments in new contexts, in new ways, to overcome new risks. And so I think what is important, particularly welcome in terms of South-South cooperation, is that governments in particular recognize that their peers, that other governments in the South, are also trying to embark on this journey. And so they want to learn, they want to understand how is the challenge being approached? What types of new policies, new types of market incentives to promote those new business models? And very importantly, how is new public finance being used to manage the risk, manage the transition? So I think South-South cooperation, whilst it has existed probably since time began, really, and certainly is not unique to the green economy challenge or the climate challenge, I think given the fact that governments are recognizing the need to take on a very ambitious agenda in terms of transformation, they are also embracing now the opportunities around South-South cooperation. I'm doing quite a lot of work in China and at the moment on green finance, and I'd like to come back to that maybe in some of the questions to talk a little bit about some of China's approach to South-South cooperation around green finance, because it's already starting to have a very positive impact in many parts of the world.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I think you raised two important points for me. One is really the need also to learn from each other. I think it's, you said a green economy platform who looks at it needs also to foster checking out, testing new economic models, new business models. But I think it's even better if you can learn from others what new business models could work, and we don't need all to do the same mistakes. So I think that's very important, and clearly what you raised also is in the financing domain, the new role of China, especially also with their Asian infrastructure bank, which has raised a lot of discussion. We could probably do a whole panel on that one. We will not, I'm sorry to say so, but nevertheless, which is really changing also the whole picture. And I would also add to that one, which was in yesterday's finance session, really the emergence now of big bond funds actually going into this market and actually allowing a new shifting of financing from early stage to late stage and to different ways. But we'll hopefully get a little bit to that one, even if this is not the main topic. Thank you very much, Amalie. Now I would like to turn to Lars Josephson, as said, chairman of the Global Agenda Council on Decarbonizing Energy, which really is a think tank, if I might say so, around this question. And my question to you would be a little bit, when you take it from the global view on what needs to be done on decarbonizing energy, where do you specifically see also the role in the South-South relations to be played? Again, it's not the only role. I mean, South-South relation is one of many different parts, but I think it's important that we keep that one in mind too.
Yeah. Now, thanks a lot, Andrea, and thanks for the invitation and the opportunity to speak here. And as you said, I will do it from the perspective of energy and decarbonizing energy. To answer your question directly, I mean, without a South-South decarbonizing of energy, we will not be successful globally. It's as simple as that. But the green economy and the decarbonizing of energy has to be driven by policy and technological development. And this has to be done within the boundaries of the market economy and, if you like, popular support. Even if you have a very rational solutions and you don't meet those criteria, it won't happen. I think it could be interesting to look at other examples as well. And if you look at Europe, Europe in the decarbonizing sense has a emission trading system, the European trading system, which is very good, I would say, but you can say maybe it doesn't work very well. Well, why doesn't it work? Well, we have at the same time 27 different subsidy schemes for renewable energy. And with the sovereign nations of the EU deciding that, you can calculate that that cost the EU about 20 billion euros a year to achieve the same result as a unified system would. So clearly the case for cooperation is extremely good. And when you say green economy, it's a lot of money to be gained by cooperation. Equally well, you can look at the United States, where you see that the state level is regulating the electricity system, and the result is a substandard and maybe not so environmentally friendly and maybe not so efficient energy system. So again, you can learn what's being done, and that should motivate cooperation. But what is it all about? Well, it's, of course, I would say it's about green infrastructure. And of course, infrastructure is a case for policy. Here I would suggest to focus on electricity and transport. And of course, the underutilization of rail as a policy mean, I think in the south is very important, in the north as well. Performance standards, so call it green standards, because it's simply the case that standards drive innovation. It's quite easy if you look at the performance standards on cars in the EU, in the US, and now in China. That drives innovation. And we now have internal combustion engines, which is a dream that we didn't even could dream 20 years ago. So a lot of things is possible, but there you can compare with that we did tax, at least in Europe, gasoline very, very high, but that did not drive innovation. So in that case, the policy mechanism was not successful, but the performance standard was successful. On the other hand, if you go to, for instance, the heating system of Sweden, Sweden put a heavy tax on CO2, and what did that bring? It meant that within 25 years we replace all oil and coal in the heating system, and now everything, or more or less, not everything, but most is electricity or biomass for heating. If you look at another revolutionary policy thing, you can look at France, who in 15 years totally redesigned their electricity system and went nuclear. Short space of time and enormous consequences. Sweden did the same, by the way, so it's interesting to see. So what are the options you have, of course, and I probably use more than my 3 minutes by now. I won't speak much about that, but I think we spoke in the session before here about solar technology, and clearly solar PV is something for the future. But you need to combine that. Either you have to have huge storage, which is cheap, or you have to have another base load mechanism. And there I'm very much a promoter to use sustainable biomass in combination with solar PV to get a fully green, sustainable electricity system. I would like to mention as well, I spoke about French nuclear, and I think we are maybe in the start, and John spoke about breakthroughs. Maybe we are before a breakthrough into the next generation of nuclear, the so-called advanced nuclear, where you go a totally different route, solve the problems of the past nuclear or the present day nuclear. Interestingly enough, no country has yet claimed that position. So this is open for grabs, I would say. It's an interesting perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think your last proposal, which is actually very interesting, will probably have to, at least in Europe, face the test whether it will actually pass popular acceptance. because currently we have a very emotional way to look at nuclear power development, and so
in some countries.
Yes, but it's quite a high discussion, nevertheless. But I think, thank you very much for your remarks. I think they give us some interesting directions, which hopefully we can develop a little bit further later. Now, I'm very pleased to have with us Martin Hiller, director from REAP. And I think your work is about renewable energies and energy efficiency. And I wanted actually to ask you initially a little bit, with the other things you want to share with us, energy efficiency, given that actually building energy consumption is a big part of actually our mix, what we would provide. And energy efficiency is something which we're practicing now quite heavily in several developed countries. But how do you see energy efficiency developments when you go to the South-South countries, and what can they do specifically about there?
Okay, thank you, Andre. REAP is focused on helping growth of clean energy markets in developing countries. We focus especially on middle income and lower income countries. And the way how we work is that we focus on sectors in the economy, such as, for instance, value chains in the agricultural field or other sectors. We look at policy change, we look at access to finance, but where we start and where we end is with individual companies. And we focus specifically on small and medium enterprises, which in settings like this one are rarely mentioned. But you know, they provide 90% of the economy, they provide 60 or 70% of employment, they provide at least 50% of GDP production, so they are huge in economic terms. And when you think back about what both speakers in the first session said in their different ways, you see that this kind of new type of economy needs a really vibrant scene in small and medium enterprises. That is where the new ideas come. That's where those young people that you talked about, you know, come with much less fear than used to be the case. You know, when I was that age, we went into politics. And we went into, in my country, or in my background, we went into environmental campaigning or other kind of campaigning, that kind of thing. People now go and create startups. They create new businesses. That's one factor is, of course, the internet, but it's not just that. There's a real mindset, a really interesting mindset that has changed. And this is absolutely not something that has been only happening in OECD countries. I would even say on the contrary. If you go today and you want to understand more about future options, and I say this carefully, future options for banking, then a very good place to go to is Kenya today. Because if you look at mobile phone applications for payments and for banking systems, that's the country in my knowledge that is most vibrant in this term. That's where things are developing. The Web Foundation and some of its partners recently organized one of these 2 or 3 day workshops for apps developers, people who develop mobile phone apps. They had calculated, and then it was the first time they went into Nairobi to organize that. They had, I think, calculated to have 30 or 40 attendants in this 3 days workshop. They had 200 people standing outside. People had been traveling from Tanzania and from Uganda to take part in this. There's a hugely vibrant scene in Kenya and around Kenya now using mobile phones for new purposes. There's probably at the moment the most successful mobile phone company is M-Pesa. It's a Kenyan invention. The origin of that was at the beginning of the last decade when consumers, mobile phone users, just used mobile phone access time as a currency replacement. Because actually that's what they needed. They didn't need money so much. They didn't want to have this transaction cost, right? And so when we talk about South-South cooperation, it has a lot to do with attraction, with curiosity, with fun, with new things coming. You know, you talked about attraction, John, in your 5 points. And it's the completely overlooked part. We talk about sustainability, we saw it's environmental, economic, and social. That's fine, but it's only going to work when it's also fun. And that's not lightweight. That's a key driver That's absolutely essential. So my job is, of course, great, because I look at all of these things and I see people who have enormous fun, who invent new businesses, who bring in new businesses. And South-South exchange at that level is something that has been, A, it's always been there, B, it's been growing enormously in the last 20 years, partly based on need and demand. If you look at generics in the pharmaceutical space, for instance, there was just a huge demand in the market and it started to happen. But today, it's a completely obvious thing that you see happening all the time. I can give many examples, but maybe I'll do that in the course of the hour.
Okay, thank you. So let's keep in mind we also should have fun here, huh? I hope.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't answer the efficiency point. Efficiency is a systems approach. It isn't something that's energy efficiency. It's a systems approach. I mean, Raphael's boat is highly efficient, right? Otherwise, he would never have made it.
Good. My question was more about, big cities growing in a certain way, and I know in India there are some questions then, what do you do when you want to develop them one step further? There were some examples where you actually build a new city next, just saying, can we deal, and that's the kind of question we'll get to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
John, to round up and build a little bit the link what we discussed before, you really talked about this need of a breakthrough and whether the curve goes up or down. How would you position that one in the South-South relation space?
Well, first I just wanted to pick up Lars's point about nuclear energy, because I come from a generation which is largely anti-nuclear. My father flew monitoring missions around the British H-bomb tests in Christmas Island. We had many reasons to be nervous about the technology, but South Africa, with their pebble bed technology, Bill Gates is now working on some really, really interesting work. I still don't like that area of technology, but under pressure, it's amazing what innovators and engineers can do. So I think one of the things we're going to have to do in this space as part of this building this green economy is really test our prejudices, our assumptions continuously. And Martin, I'm not saying this to upset you simply, but earlier on today you said to me that yesterday people were using $1 trillion, trillion euros, trillion whatevers, left, right and center, and none of us could make any sense of that. But yesterday I got an email from Hazel Henderson's team with their Green Transition Scorecard, and she talks about since 2007, $6.22 trillion having been invested in this green economy space. Now that's just invested. That doesn't get into the valuations of the market opportunities. Then to your South-South dynamics, which I think are absolutely critical. They've come through a number of times over these 2 days, but I don't think yet have been properly addressed. And I think that there's a huge amount of work to be done in that space. And I just want to make put one warning note out there. Be very careful what language we actually end up using, because yesterday there was a conversation around technology transfer, and many people who develop technology and intellectual property hear that as they want our technology and they're not going to pay for it. South-South means to some brains, well, it'll be China to India to whatever else, and we're going to be locked out. I don't think that way of framing this is actually going to work really well. And as I said, yesterday was Earth Day. Somehow we've got to work out how to think about this as a collective in a way. And a final point, just in terms of where the real innovation that shakes old economies and helps to create new ones, where it always happens on the edges of the economy. And so, in a way, the global South is the perfect place to expect to see some of this stuff coming through. But I think it's going to need support, a huge amount of support from other parts of the world. So that's enough.
Thank you. I think an important point I take out of you is when we talk about South-South relation, we should think perhaps more about the specific challenges which we want to address there, but without saying it's just South-South and they're in their corner and we're somewhere North-North and we're in our corner. And I didn't intend to say so. And I must say what you just mentioned before about M-Pesa and this whole new approach to banking, which some people actually call social banking because it takes away some of the stuff which we like less about banking.
It's more accessible.
I think Yeah, so I think, I mean, there is actually an opportunity in developing countries to develop totally new businesses which address their challenges, but actually, as a side effect, shows us new ways to do things. So I think, and we have to keep that in mind. Now I want to quickly come back to one question which I want to quickly go through the panel here. When you spoke about the plans done for India and so on. I mean, if, you know, we're here also lots of business people, and they want to know what could we develop, where could we do something, because green economy at the end of the day is about companies, and I'm not talking only about big companies, any kind of companies, developing new markets, new opportunities. And when we want to look at the green economy, opportunities in the green space, what do you see in the context of India as the real development hotspots in the green economy which can happen? I mean, we've heard some about solar with biogas, I mean, in the energy production, but I think there are others, because we sometimes tend to limit our green discussion on energy discussions. That's very important, but there's other topics like transportation, like production questions, like water management, waste management, things like that. So where do you see, especially in your context, the growth hotspots which could really give a kick to the development of green economy in your context?
I'll answer your question in two ways. First, let's go back to history. The first chairperson, if I'm not wrong, of the South-South Commission, when it formed, was the former Prime Minister of India, Dr. Manmohan Singh. And the first, at that time, the focus was on trade and development. Today, when you are talking about a South-South Commission, what's the agenda of the action? One of the most important thing is sharing the best practices in the South countries. Because the countries are different. The demography is different, the size of the economy, the size of the, everything is different. So something must get cut across, this is the best practices. One of the best practices which we did in India was, with the Government of India initiative, was eco-clubs. The former Brand Commission, when the Australian Prime Minister was there, he was saying that this is one of the best things that we should happen in each South countries. Now, what is the Eco Club? Each school in India has an environmental club where a teacher is there and the school children are there. As John was saying, who will going to spearhead the movement for this green economy? The children, the school children. And these eco clubs have been able to promote change in policies, have brought about so much of change in the way the people look at the lifestyles. So this is one best practices. The other one, talking about the opportunities, we have brought out a report, a low carbon economic growth model, which is for each sector. When there is a change in the transport mix, when there is a change in the energy mix, when there is a change in the demand, consumption pattern, what is the investment required, and what is the opportunities in the renewable sector, what are the opportunities in the waste management. Each one have been given a particular figure, and the target is 2030, and for each one of these targets, the investment requirement has given, and how much private sector can contribute to that. It's an immensely useful report. And the Government of India has adopted that report. This is for the Government of India. Now, each state government is now working on their green growth report for 2030 as the year of reckoning. And then in that they are, so what I'm trying to say is the two agenda items of the South-South Commission could be share the best practices in each country. One of our best practices has been the Eco Club, which has been, in fact, championed by the Prime Minister of Australia. The second one is relating to how does the government promote that, promote this movement through its various initiatives. One of them is produce a report which clearly indicates the targets and also the investment requirements of that. I think these are the two things we should have.
Thank you. Adam, what would you add to that one? Where do you see, being also a coordinating agency, the hotspots from your different agencies and so on, where green economy development, especially in the South-South region, will really kick in?
All right, thank you. I just wanted, listening to what the colleagues were saying and what John is saying, and I just wanted to share a few thoughts. One is South-South cooperation does not exist in a vacuum, and certainly there are experiences that the countries in the North can share with the countries in the South. And when we speak, at the moment we start speaking about South-South cooperation, we also speak about triangular cooperation. Because there are instances where the two countries, let's say, I don't know, Tunisia and Djibouti, they have something to share in terms of expertise, knowledge, but they may not have sufficient resources to start this process. Here comes the triangular cooperation, where the third player, whether the UN, any other multilateral or traditional donor country, comes in and supports the process. And the fact is that many traditional donors, including GIZ, Germany, including JICA, including the European Commission, they have a very explicit and clear strategy on South-South cooperation and their role in this process as triangular cooperation partners. So this is one. Triangular cooperation and South-South cooperation always come hand in hand. In terms of green economy, maybe I'm preempting a little bit the discussion, but one of the three questions we wanted to discuss was the impact of South-South cooperation and green economy on the global development. I wanted to turn it around a little bit and actually say that I think South-South cooperation in green economy will have impact on how countries cooperate on other areas. Because green economy related to environmental challenges, to climate change, this is one of the most obvious, one of the most even tangible areas where countries should and must cooperate beyond their boundaries. And as we speak about South-South cooperation and the value added of South-South cooperation for green economy, I hope everybody would agree that the countries, one of the prerequisites of South-South cooperation, and that countries with comparable contexts like climatic, geographical, cultural, they share common challenges, and most likely the solution that worked in one country would work in a country with a comparable context. So what it gives us as a value added is that simply the costs related to sharing the expertise, sharing the solutions are lower. So we save money, time, resources. This reflects this works through commonality in language, commonality in problems, geographical proximity. So this is the next thought. And the last one, I just wanted to say that if we speak specifically about the regions, as we speak about green economy, it's different, it's understood in different terms in different regions and different countries. Martin was speaking about energy efficiency. From our experience, I work with Arab states and Europe and CIS. For example, in Eastern Europe, when we speak about green economy, of course it's renewables, but to start with, people immediately start thinking about retrofitting and energy efficiency for the existing facilities. When we work in the Arab states region, and it's more south geographically, we think more about solar power and renewable energy. So yes, it's important that we understand the role of South-South cooperation, not in relation to other forms of cooperation.
Thank you very much. Amalie, I mean, where do you see the hotspots, and perhaps also a little bit from the financing side, because that's the other side of the equation, and perhaps that will allow you to go back what you already announced you wanted to go a little bit more into.
Yeah, thank you. I think, yeah, just as I think Adem just said, I think it's important to recognize there's no cookie cutter. Yeah. There's no one size fits all. So what works in one country, you cannot take and replicate it in another. But I think there are a lot of lessons that can be shared, particularly around the process by which the changes are implemented. And we see this a lot in the green finance sector now. I mentioned China. China for a few years now has been developing green credit guidelines, which has been primarily driven by their very significant air and water pollution problems. Local air quality can be very bad, water quality. So they are really embarking now on a very aggressive green investment approach, and doing that through the banking sector. The People's Bank of China, the central bank, and the banking regulator have been collaborating with the Ministry of Environment to create these green credit guidelines. And those are now starting to really have real impact on the ground. And what is interesting is that I think many other countries in the developing world are seeing what China's doing and are really saying, you know, particularly the central bankers and regulators are saying, hey, if China's doing this, we want to know, you know, how can we understand this and maybe do the same? And actually there is now a very interesting network called the Sustainable Finance Regulation Network. It's only emerging economies. I think the IFC, International Finance Corporation, nominally acted as the secretariat, but it's very much a South-South engagement around how to create the sorts of policy, regulatory, financial incentives for green investments, and what does that mean working through the domestic banking sector. That is a very clear example. It's relatively new. I think it's maybe met 3 times on an annual basis, but it is a network that exists permanently, is closed to outsiders, including, in fact, I've had conversations with people involved and said, well, it'd be great to bring some OECD central bankers in. The Bank of England recently announced that it will focus much more now on climate risk. It sees big potential impacts, big potential risks to the UK economy as a result of climate, whether it's the impacts of climate or stranded assets, as John mentioned. And so central bankers who, you know, they're at the heart of the economy ultimately, they're now starting to take this agenda on, and that really is key to the transformational changes we need to see. And I just would like to say a little word about the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, because as I said at the beginning, I think one of the key challenges now, where we are at this stage, for governments it's around creating the right public policy, but also using public finance that is relatively scarce compared to private finance, using that very strategically, very targeted to really manage specific risks to mobilize and scale up private sector investment. And so I think the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank provides a really great opportunity to really be a new green finance institution that can drive this transformation. And the reason I have this here is I wanted to just read out a quote and get it right from the Chinese Secretary General of the interim secretariat for the AAIB. He said in Singapore a couple of weeks ago, the new bank would be lean, clean and green.
You spoke about solar as an important contribution. Where else do you see hotspots, if there are, in the green economy development being also substantially contributive to the economic development in the developing countries?
There are many, you call it hotspots, but there are many areas where you can work. And I think it also starts with awareness, political will and leadership. And I was just thinking about Africa, because when you look at Africa, you can ask yourself, why is it more efficient or easier to fly between 2 capitals of Africa through Europe than directly?
Yeah.
And why does the neighboring countries requiring visas to go from one country to another? Or why is Africa's infrastructure designed to get goods out of Africa instead of being used in Africa? And I think all these things can be changed and have to be changed, and that will be the basis for, I would say, African cooperation, but that is South-South cooperation. Of course, that goes for the energy infrastructure as well. And if you look at electricity, of course, it's a question of how is an African grid built, or where it has to be built in order for cooperation to take place. And of course, if you look at Africa, that's an ideal continent for if I call it bioeconomy, because the fundamental resource is actually there. It's being used in the wrong way or not used at all. So if you want a hotspot, that's a hotspot. And I think that can be done a number of things. But I would also like to add, when we discuss in these types of conferences, that we live in a very, very big world. And I'm also involved in a charity called Hand in Hand, creating jobs for the poorest people of the world. We work a lot in India, and there we created a waste collection system just outside of Chennai, because the waste collection system in a middle-class neighborhood does not work. By employing unemployed people, going manually around the houses, collecting waste every day, then producing compost and selling it back to the same houses who produce the waste, is actually a functioning business model in a very, very lowest level possible. But how can we bring these things to scale? I mean, that's if you not do it one time, but maybe in India 1 million times, it will actually be possible. So the task or the things we discuss is really daunting. What we have to do collectively is enormous. The challenge is enormous, and it's not as easy sometimes as we speak here.
I would say, at least in the discussions I had up to now, people are actually realizing how daunting this task is. Yeah. And I think a term which came up is actually, how do we scale up? We hear a lot about good initiatives, but at the end of the day, when we see what needs to be done at the very end, we're troubling sometimes to see what is the accelerator, the multiplicator. Okay. But I think you put one thing forward. It's really also about collaboration. It's about not competing on those things, but actually sharing and working together. Because I think the biggest risk, as we said before, is that I mean, at the end of the day, yesterday we had the Planet Day. I mean, that should remind us, at the end of the day, we're all fighting for the same planet. And we will not be able to cut out our little country and saying, we did everything we needed to do, and hence we were going to survive and the others not. So I think that is certainly an important part to be looked at. But thank you very much. Martin, to you the same question. Where do you see out also of what you do, the hotspots of this development really going forward, or where probably also will be a lot of startup creation? You mentioned some domains and also economic opportunities for the small and medium enterprises.
Yeah, it's that link, no, between a small and medium enterprise and the trillions. How do you actually make that happen? I think one answer is a focus on the SME sector, and looking at what these startups need, what needs to be done in order to accommodate an emerging strong startup scene and make it stronger. In the finance discussion, the green finance discussion yesterday, I was too late in the audience to still bring that in, but there was a final question by you about, what are missing tools? One tool that we think is at least maybe not completely missing, but should be much stronger, is very patient initial capital. So what we do, for instance, is we give grants, or we give what we call repayable grants, essentially 0% interest loans, that help these individual companies to establish themselves better, develop a primary track record. So it's a patient tool that really is not focused on a financial return. But we also want a return, because what we want is, we want to understand the sector better through observing and monitoring the individual company. So a second very important point is market intelligence in these markets, in order to attract bigger companies into that field. We, for instance, have 2 companies at the moment that we're working with in Kenya on solar irrigation. Different business models, different types of clients, all of those focusing on farmers between 2 and 5 hectares, but very different types of client groups. So you suddenly start to appreciate the market in a much better detail and in much greater depth. And that's not what, quite frankly, nobody cares if REAP understands this, but the policymakers in Kenya are interested in this. And the financial sector in Kenya is interested in this, because this is actually de-risking of that particular sector for the local financial market. So it's a better understanding of how to grow a new business field. And I think this is where a lot of work needs to go in. I believe that I also still owe you 2 sentences about efficiency. Just an example where energy efficiency plays a huge role is in lighting for very poor people. When LED came up, that was a huge game changer. Everybody talks about the cost of photovoltaic. Of course, that's the other very big game changer. But the fact that LED light exists now has changed the energy efficiency of those systems tremendously by a factor, at least a factor of 10. That means you get much more light out of a watt. And, so this is a typical case where energy efficiency plays a role. Because if you have very little energy overall, energy efficiency plays a much bigger role than when you have loads of it to waste. The city point, on looking at efficiency in terms of city planning, disregarding if it's the new capital of Egypt or the 100 cities planned in India, the 100 new cities, the limiting factor is certainly not energy. The limiting factor, in my view, is water. And if you look at our energy systems today, the classical energy systems, they are very water intensive. You have in Europe, you have, many of the thermal power stations, disregarding what fuel, have to shut down in a dry summer because there's not enough cooling water. So the water efficiency, the water use point is a critical point for planning the economy. That's, I think, is a starting level.
Thank you very much. John, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just quickly, building on what everyone else has said, and I find it a fascinating panel, and it's almost like a menu of people I'd like to sort of have deeper conversations with. But I just want to very quickly pick out 3 points. The first is, and it picks up on Martin's point about cities, just over 50% of our species now lives in cities. It'll be 70% in a few decades. So getting cities right is absolutely fundamental. So the first point is, the hardware, the infrastructures, we've got to learn to be brilliantly better at building those and ways that are genuinely sustainable. So Dubai may be a model, and I was sitting next to somebody from the planning team here yesterday who was telling me some of the things that are going on in areas like water. Fascinating, but it was a slight surprise to me. So the first thing is that infrastructure piece. Second is software. Those infrastructures have to be infinitely smarter, wiser, almost. And therefore, Silicon Valley perhaps has a slight monopoly at the moment on software, but this stuff can be done anywhere. And the coding of that new green economy, I think, is fundamentally important. Again, back to younger people, they're the people often who will end up doing that. Then just the final third point, education. Many people think that we're running out of time, we haven't got time to educate people, we've just got to do stuff now. Nonsense. I mean, we're in this game for centuries. We have to be. And therefore, the style of education that we offer, not just younger people, but aging populations as they get older, phenomenally important. And to the lean, clean, and green piece, brilliant. But by God, we don't yet know how to do all of that properly. So again, back to education and continuous education in the mix.
Thank you very much. I think the point of education is really important. I mean, having to do also with some universities. Yeah. I think the challenge will be how can we actually share with all the students, whatever they study, how they have to contextualize what they study in the challenges of our time. Because that can give them ideas where they should perhaps guide their research too. And secondly, we need to get universities much better on technology transfer. In the old sense, meaning creating startups, helping transfer ideas which professors or researchers have to go into small companies to actually build new things. We need to shorten this cycle because, and we have to perhaps allow, if I can speak for the university people, that yes, it's nice to be pure research, but we need to assure that pure research at one stage translates into implementation. And I think there also vocational schools will play a more important role. We need to think also the whole chain of teaching down. And perhaps last point is we really need to put more emphasis, what business schools started, on teaching people to understand what sustainability actually really means when you look at any kind of problem. Mm-hmm. And I think we need to do that now in all other universities, even to a physics student. And so I think there is something to be done. I have to give you one excuse. I really wanted to get to the public, but we're almost at the end of this session, and given that we all would like to have a coffee break, and I was carried away by all those different opinions here, so I'm really, it's my fault, I'm sorry about that one. But before closing, I would really ask each one of you to give us the one sentence you want to share with the people here to go home. Because as I said in the previous session, the important thing is not the meeting here. It's actually walking out with new ideas, going home wherever we are and do something with it, which brings us further, because there's an important way to go, and it will only be done by all of us. And so I will actually start down here again, just a very short thing you want to share with the people here to take it with, and reminds them when they get home and discover their 150 emails they haven't dealt with yet, that they won't forget some of the good ideas they got here.
Yeah, the movement towards global green economy can succeed if the South-South countries get together, share their best practices, and share with their children what needs to be done in the next 20 years. That's the only key to the success.
Thank you very much.
Okay. If there is one thing to share, I think as we speak about green economy and South-South cooperation, it is probably worthwhile thinking in terms of having the thought leaders or examples to follow, and also creating an even playing field, because each country in the global South has something to offer, independently from how wealthy they are. And I just want to bring an example of this carbon ambassadors program that we witnessed yesterday, the amazing presentation. I think one of the examples of this role model, we're now in Dubai here, is the UAE, where they do both. On one side, they set a very good examples for other countries to follow, but there are also other countries, like we have India. In India, you have a very good practical example where fossil fuels and renewables, they marry under one roof of the gas stations. The gas stations that produce solar power that relieves energy for 60, each gas station allows to save energy for 60 houses. So we have to recognize that there are other countries that can also contribute to this process, and through these carbon ambassador programs, I think the United Arab Emirates allows other countries to get in and to position themselves also in this process.
Thank you.
It's a long sentence.
Yes.
I would like, just three main elements really. I mean, it's innovation. That's technological innovation. We've heard a lot about. Excellent to see the solar-powered boat around the world trip. But it's also about policy innovation and financial innovation, to do things differently, to ensure that we genuinely promote a green economy that benefits all countries and all members of society. And collaboration, peer-to-peer engagement, absolutely critical, I think, in terms of learning, sharing knowledge, sharing ways in which we do things, and understanding how best practice can be taken on board. And then really, I think it's learning by doing. I think, as John said, we're in this for the long haul. We're at the beginning, really, of hopefully a very long journey. If climate change doesn't get so catastrophic, the journey becomes shorter. But we need to not be prepared to take risks, be prepared to innovate and learn by doing. And I think that the UAE and Dubai now, with the aspiration to be the green capital of the world by 2021 can really promote, can incubate, foster all three of those, the innovation, the collaboration, and the learning by doing and demonstration.
Thank you very much. Lars?
Yeah, very short. I would say think hard about how you can align market forces to the green economy. Use your policy instruments, use performance standards, think about that taxes is much preferable to subsidies, and think about that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. It's better to cooperate with others than to reinvent your own wheel.
Thank you. Martin?
You know, I think the one thing that everybody needs in their life is optimism. That makes you up, get up in the morning. And I do appreciate that the problems are very big or enormously big, but think 100 years back, the problems were also enormously big. Yeah, we were just entering First World Wars in parts of the world. And lots of things were breaking down, at least in my part of the world. So that is not an unusual situation per se. The possibilities, the opportunities are tremendous as well. And I think the potential to overcome these problems and create something that actually works, the opportunities are equally tremendous and certainly, from my point of view, a match for the problems. There's a lot of hard work between here and there. So, you know, let's go and do the hard work, but keep in mind that it's actually possible to achieve.
Thank you. John?
And to have fun along the way. What I'm going to say is going to sound revolutionary, given that Andre just banned questions from the floor, from the room. But ask questions, really, because, you know, it's one of the things that NGOs and so on haven't been that great at doing. They go out to tell people what to do. We've got to challenge people through just the process of inquiry. And I think the big new challenge, we tend to look at coal, we tend to look at oil, we tend to look at the automotive sector. Think about drones, artificial intelligence, big data, biomimicry, nanotechnology, all of these things that are coming up. We've got to get out there now and talk to those people, engage them in conversation, and help them improve their science, their technology, and the applications of all of those. So ask questions.
Thank you very much to this very inspiring, very interesting panel. Thank you very much to you. My excuses again that I did not go and ask questions, but we'll catch up. So now is a coffee break for 15 minutes just outside, and then please come back to the two breakout sessions. One is on public-private partnerships, risks, rewards, and solutions, which is over there. And here will be the breakout session, green consumption, new consumer expectations, new products, new demand management. Thank you very much and good continuation.
Thank you. Good continuation to you.
Yes.